Well, as was noted this morning, we've got a number of folks out of town. A few more have left this afternoon, but all of you are here, and I appreciate your presence. It's good to have some who are visiting with us. We're glad for your presence, and I want to encourage you to think along with me tonight as we talk about an important subject. I mean, who among us hasn't been at least on the receiving end, and probably at sometimes on the giving end of a good, did you hear about? And it's common. It's everywhere. It's popular. It fuels a certain number of TV shows, tabloids, the internet. And yet you start thinking about the word gossip. It's amazing how few times it occurs in most of the translations we use. Now, I say most. A lot of you use the English Standard. It's a little more common in it. But if you look in the King James, the New King James, the Old American Standard, you don't see it often. But you do see words like whisperers, backbiters, slanderers, and some other principles. And I think trying to define gossip, I find it's not as easy as you might think. These are some definitions I found. To reveal personal or sensational facts about others. A rumor or report of an intimate nature. To talk idly, especially about the affairs of others. But when I think about gossip, I really think back to the decision, and I don't remember the name of the justice on the Supreme Court in the 1960s, hearing a case about obscenity. He made the statement, in effect, he said, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. When it comes to gossip, it's hard to get an exact definition. Yes, it's just talking about personal things about others. But not all things of that nature are gossip. But we usually know when it's been told. Sometimes somebody says, well, if it's true. No. There are things that are reported of a personal, intimate nature, whispering that is harmful, that is gossip, that may be true. I don't think truth or lies is the determining factor. I'm going to talk about the harmful nature of gossip, and then I'm going to kind of interrupt myself to talk about how sometimes there are some gray areas, and it can be a little difficult to say this is wrong, this is not wrong. And then we'll look at some questions to maybe help us sort through all of that. I don't want to spread gossip about a preacher, but I was talking with one, and I told him what I was going to talk about. And this preacher, he's really good. He's a lot better than I am. I told him what I was going to talk about. He said, I've over the years gotten up several sermons on gossip. And he said, I've never liked how any of them turned out. And that really warmed my heart as I thought, boy, okay. So I'm saying that to say, y'all be kind. He's better than me. He wasn't happy with his efforts. Maybe you won't be happy with mine. But I think it is an important subject. And I want to begin just with a general principle. Words matter. I think that we confuse the idea that we have the freedom of speech. It's what we call a right in this country of freedom of speech. But what's a constitutional right does not equal a Christian privilege. God wants us to watch our words. Look at Matthew, the 12th chapter again, and I'm not going to read all that Will read for us, and I appreciate him reading that because it sets a context you've already got. Words come from the heart, but take note of 36 and 37 again. But I say to you that for every idle word men may speak, they will give account of it in the day of judgment. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. the things we say do matter. They matter in judgment. Our words can bring condemnation to us. They can bring justification to us. Look at Ephesians, the 4th chapter, verse 29. As he's talking about putting off the old man, putting on the new man, he said, "Let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth, but what is good for necessary edification, that it may impart grace to the hearers." I suspect over the years, a lot more has been said about the corrupt words than the words that produce edification. We've been warned about cursing. We've been warned about euphemisms. We've been warned about, various things. And how much stress have we placed upon the fact that we ought to be using words to build people up, to impart grace. And then finally, James, the 3rd chapter, as we just talk about the general principle of words matter. In James 3, he speaks of how that everybody has stumbling points. But he says the tongue may be the toughest thing to get under control. And he uses various illustrations of how the tongue, it's just a small member of our body, but it can do so much harm. He says, we put a bit in a horse's mouth. That little small bit can turn that horse. The ship, the rudder, is very small compared to the size of the ship, but the direction it controls. And the tongue, he says, verse 5, is a little member and boasts great things. See how great a forest a little fire kindles. And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. The tongue is so set among our members that it defiles the whole body and sets on fire the course of nature and is set on fire by hell. For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and creature of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by mankind. But no man can tame the tongue. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. With it we bless our God and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceed blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not to be so. This one really serves as a great transition to moving more specifically into gossip. And that, think about what he says here. The tongue is this little member, and it causes great harm. It's one of the hardest things to bring under control. And what does he focus on? Does he focus on the fact that sometimes people tell dirty jokes with the tongue? That's condemned elsewhere, but that's not the one thing he focuses on here. Do sometimes people blaspheme God? Yes, that's condemned elsewhere. But what he focuses on right here, he's given this attention. The thing he's pointing at is, James is writing to believers. He said, we'll bless God, but then we'll take the same tongue that praised God and we'll tear down others. We curse them. He said, we ought not to be that way. Some things that I think directly relate to the subject. Look at Matthew, the 18th chapter. In the passages I'm going to be looking at, most of them are not unfamiliar to you. This one in particular, very well known. Moreover, if your brother sins against you, let everybody know what he's done. Let everybody know how badly you've been hurt. No? He said, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he hears you, you've gained your brother. And then he proceeds to tell, well, what if he doesn't listen? I'm not going to argue, because I think other scriptures would prove me wrong, that this is the exclusive pattern for dealing with wrongs. Sometimes it may be necessary to seek some counsel. How do you think I should handle this? But I know this. this passage and others are telling, you don't go and broadcast it. That's not the first step to take. We need to make application of this. Look at Romans, the first chapter. Sometimes we talk about judging somebody by the company they keep. Sometimes that's done unfairly, but look at the company that gossip keeps. Romans 1. These are the people that have rejected God from their knowledge. In verse 29, being filled with all unrighteousness, sexual immorality, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, evil-mindedness. They are whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, violent, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, undiscerning, untrustworthy, unloving, unforgiving, unmerciful, who knowing the righteous judgment of God, that those who practice such things are deserving of death, not only do the same, but also approve of those who practice them. If you look at verse 31, the unloving, unforgiving, unmerciful probably enters into it. But the two words I really want to note, end of verse 29, they are whisperers. The next verse, backbiters. English Standard says they are gossips, slanderers. Whispering. And I think it's intriguing that he would use that word, because isn't that how we often do gossip? These pictures represent, I don't want anybody else to hear this, but, and we tell this juicy bit that we've learned about someone, and we share that. But look where it falls into all this ungodliness that he says is worthy of death. In 2 Corinthians, the 12th chapter, Paul is concerned about Corinth. They fixed a lot of things. To be Captain Obvious for a moment. 2 Corinthians follows 1 Corinthians, right? 1 Corinthians, the church is just filled with problems. 2 Corinthians, some things have been fixed, yet he still had some concerns. Verse 20, for I fear lest when I come, I shall not find you such as I wish, that I shall be found by you such as you do not wish, lest there be contentions, jealousies, outbursts of wrath, selfish ambitions, backbitings, whisperings, conceits, tumults. He goes on with some other concerns, but he says, I'm worried that there's going to be backbiting and whispering. Again, English Standard, slandering, gossip. Paul was worried about those things. He considered those to be things of concern. In 1 Timothy, the 3rd chapter, as we're going through the qualifications of elders and deacons, in verse 11 it said, likewise their wives must be reverent, not slanderers, temperate, faithful in all things. And I put in parentheses, and elders, there's some question as to whether this applies only to the wives of deacons or it's intended to apply to both. But what I just want you to see the point is, he was concerned, he didn't want them to be slanderers. The margin says malicious gossips. God wants us to control our tongues. He wants us to control our tongues in every way. He wants us to control our tongue when it comes to whispering, to being gossips, to being backbiters, to being slanderers. That in itself is enough. But I want you to think about maybe some reasons that God singles out whispering. Why he tells us, I don't want you to be these kind of people. And I want to go to the book of Proverbs. Proverbs 16 and verse 27. Proverbs is a book of practical wisdom. And verse 27, an ungodly man digs up evil, and it is on his lips like a burning fire. A perverse man sows strife, and a whisperer separates the best of friends. Verse 27, you think about how we talk about somebody that they talk about money burns a hole in their pocket, meaning, they get a little money, they've got to spend it. There are people, they learn something about somebody, it's like a fire on their lips. It's got to be told. They can't keep it in. But look at what he says at the end of verse 28, our focus. A whisperer separates the best of friends. People will go and say, do you know what so-and-so said about you? I heard so-and-so say this the other day. I was really surprised. I thought y'all were friends. Sometimes they've misconstrued what was said. Sometimes maybe what was heard was true. But it was spoken at a moment of frustration. A moment when somebody was not at their best and would regret it. But we go and we tell it. And then we've caused a tension between friends. I just got passed over for a promotion I was hoping for at work. And somebody said, hey, did you hear your friend Joe? He got promoted to executive vice president. That news comes to me about the time that I've just gotten passed over, maybe in frustration. And that's not excusing it, but I say, yeah, he just gets every lucky break, it seems. The next day, I'm happy for him. But right at that moment, I'm a little, I'm really frustrated at my own situation. But then somebody goes and they tell Joe, you know what John said about you? He said, you only got that promotion because you just get lucky breaks. You didn't really deserve it. That's not exactly what I said, but it's not too far off. Except, why did they tell him? Give me a little time. I wouldn't repeat it. Repeating things, it damages relationship. And this is, closely related. It stirs strife. This is very picturesque in chapter 26 and verse 20. And we understand it fully. Where there is no wood, the fire goes out. And where there is no talebearer, strife ceases. The margin for talebearer has the word gossip. If there's no gossip, it's just like taking the wood away from the fire, taking the gossip out of it, and the strife goes away. As charcoal is to burning coals and wood to fire, so is a contentious man to kindle strife. The words of a talebearer are like tasty trifles, and they go down into the inmost body. The last part of that explains why, though God says it's a sin, though it can separate friends, it can cause strife, why do people still gossip? Because there's a market for it. That it's like, we use the word juicy gossip. Did you hear that juicy gossip? He says, reject that. Don't be that person. You think about how it impacts churches, families. Get gossip going around the school. And what's the strife it causes among people? It can be awful. It affects the community. Look at Ephesians, the 4th chapter, and I want to relate this specifically to the church. He says, I therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you to walk worthy of the calling with which you were called, with all lowliness and gentleness, with long suffering, bearing with one another in love, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. There ought to be on my part a great desire to see unity. And I ought never to say anything that I believe would harm that unity. That I've got to make certain I care about that. In Galatians, the 5th chapter, he speaks of how they would bite and devour. And he says in verse 15, you beware lest you be consumed by one another. let's be careful. Families, churches can be just torn apart by gossip. And reputations can be ruined. What matters most is what God thinks of me. What matters most is, are you in an approved relationship with God? And yet, Proverbs 22:1, a good name is rather to be chosen than great riches. Matthew 5:14 through 16, he tells us that we want to be lights in this world, not to glorify self. Remember verse 16, we let our light shine so that men may see our good works and glorify God. Our reputation, our standing in the church, in the community, it has a bearing on how we are able to influence others for good. And words, gossip can destroy a reputation. Going back to Matthew 18, maybe he did something wrong. Go and talk to him. Give him a chance to fix it before you tell everybody else. Or maybe you find out, it really wasn't the way I heard it was. Maybe what I thought I saw, I thought I saw something. And I go and I talk to him, I saw it wrong. Give them a chance. Sometimes people, even without being admonished, regret what they've said, what they've done. And they make apologies to anybody that was around them. But here's just a simple fact. Word of a transgression tends to spread much further than word of an apology. You do something and people start talking about it. Then you do your best to correct it. A lot of the people who would spread the news that you did it in the beginning, they don't feel the same obligation to tell everybody, oh, he's corrected that. He's apologized. That's been fixed. Once it's out there, it is hard to get it back. So, where are we? Gossip's bad. God doesn't approve of it. And we can see some reasons why. All God has to say is, don't be a whisperer and a backbiter. And that's enough. But we've seen these kind of situations. If you're of any age at all, you've seen things being told, sometimes rumors, that prove to be untrue. Sometimes facts, but they just didn't need to be shared. You've seen it separate friends, cause strife in various settings, ruin reputations. So it's clear cut, right? Well, let me get to the tricky part. Gossip is always wrong. But I want you to turn to 1 Corinthians 1 for a second. And I want to ask you about the household of Chloe. Verse 10, now I plead with you, brethren, by the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that you all speak the same thing, that there be no divisions among you, but that you be perfectly joined together in the same mind and in the same judgment. For it has been declared to me concerning you, my brethren, by those of Chloe's household, that there are contentions among you. Those of Chloe's household shared with Paul the fact that there were divisions in the church at Corinth. Were they gossips? Were they telling things they should not? I would offer to you that Paul didn't seem to think so. He felt like it was something that he needed to address, and he wasn't calling them out for sin. He was calling out those that had created the division. I think we all think about Philippians 2, or Philippians 4, verses 2 through 3, and the awkwardness of that letter as it was being read to the church at Philippi. And all of a sudden, in the middle of the reading, it says, I implore Euodia and Syntyche to be of the same mind. And, these two ladies are called out by name for the fact that they're not getting along right now. How did Paul know about that? Somebody had to have told him. He was in Rome. The most likely candidate, and I don't want to gossip about him, but it would be Epaphroditus, who had brought, their aid to him. But somebody told him. How did John know that Diotrephes, rejected the messengers? That he was casting people out of the church? These are three examples from the Bible where we know, in the one case, we know it was the household of Chloe. We can speculate about the others. But people shared some information, negative information about people. And I don't think the dividing line was simply the fact that it was true. How do I separate gossip from what we see here? Well, I'm going to offer to you 5 questions that we need to ask ourselves. And the first one is by far the most important, I think. In 1 Corinthians 13, we have something said here where we know it, but I'm not sure we think about it as often as we should. Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I have become sounding brass or a clanging cymbal. Though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so that I could remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. Though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned, but have not love, it profits me nothing. We use a good biblical word, the word sound, to describe people and churches sometimes. That's a sound church. That's a sound preacher. That's a sound person. And I fear that sometimes all we mean by that is doctrinal. That, they're a sound church. They teach sound doctrine. Do they show love, kindness, compassion toward others? Are they that kind of people? An unloving church is not a sound church. An unloving person is not sound in the faith, no matter how pure their doctrine. And so I've got to start with love. Well, what is love? Love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself, is not puffed up, does not behave rudely, does not seek its own, is not provoked, thinks no evil, does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. There's several things in this that I think directly relate to the subject tonight. Look at what's said in verse 6, does not rejoice in iniquity. If I hear something and it's like the burning coals on my lips and I just can't wait to tell it, is that love? That's an issue. Why am I so, I just heard this juicy bit of gossip I've got to share. Is that not rejoicing in iniquity? And then he says, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Note especially believes and hopes. Sometimes words and actions are subject to interpretation. How it can be taken in different ways. And I would offer that oftentimes love determines how I interpret it. If I see something I ought not give it the worst possible interpretation. Now, there are things that are clearly sinful. I'm not talking something that's clearly wrong. But somebody said something, and I give it the worst possible meaning. That's not love. But then think about, there are times that I may need to say something. I need to tell somebody that, there may be somebody that I need to warn them about. This is somebody you need to be careful about. But here's the question. Would I offer that warning about somebody I loved? Am I doing it because I care about the person I'm telling? Or is it just because I want to tell it? Whatever I do, let me make sure it's done in love. That needs to be done. And then truth does matter. You can repeat things that are true and it be wrong. But it certainly is wrong to repeat something that's not true. Ephesians 4 verse 25 tells us to put away lying. What do? We give ourselves an out, don't we? Now, I'm not saying I know for sure, but I was told. Well, I need to first of all ask myself, if it were true, do I really need to be telling it? But if I don't know, why would I tell it? And I would ask this question in conjunction. Are people that are in the public eye exempted from what the Bible says to us about not lying, about not gossiping? If there's somebody that I don't like, whether it's sports, entertainment, politics, whatever, they're in the public arena. I just think they're a fair target. I heard a rumor about them. I was listening to a talk show, and they played a 5-second soundbite out of a 2-hour speech. So, I know it's true. Yeah. Did y'all know? I'm going to gossip just a little bit right now. Did you know that King David did not believe in God? He was an atheist. Because he wrote in the Psalms, there is no God. It's plain. I can point you right there where it is. Now, a little context, he said, the fool has said in his heart there is no God. So maybe David wasn't an atheist. But that's the kind of thing's done. It's done to get, media, clicks on the internet, to get ratings on the 24-hour cable news. Let's not participate in that. Third question, is there any benefit to repeating what I know? Ephesians 4:29, that business of let my words build up. Let them impart grace to the hearers. Let's just say a convicted child molester moved into your neighborhood. And one of his neighbors has small children. I personally do not think it would be wrong for you to point out to the neighbor, look, we hope that he is reformed, but be careful. You need to be aware of this situation. There's a benefit there. There's a neighbor that needs to be on guard, needs to be watching his children, protecting them. But, and I'll tell you a little story from my life that I almost didn't stop. I was going back through some old history in a church where I was preaching one time. I was just reading through minutes, trying to kind of learn a little more about the church. And in their minutes, They had saved the written confession. Somebody had written out a confession of wrongdoing involving sexual immorality, and they had this statement read before the congregation. The person was no longer in the church there, but I knew him. And like, wow. It was, it was one of these, my girlfriend and I, she's pregnant, we're, shotgun wedding type thing. Like, wow, I didn't know that about him. He's a faithful Christian now. She is too. I thought, when I got home at lunch, I was going to tell Janet about it. It's like, well, did you know this? I thought, no. Who needs to know it? The people back then knew it. It needed to die. I've not always done that, to my shame. There have been times that I've learned something, and I shared it, and I shouldn't have. And I think sometimes why we share things is, going back to what we talked about this morning, pride. That business of humbling ourselves, not being proud. We all like to know something nobody else knows. I mean, there's just, I think that's part of human nature. That we like to be able to say, did you know, and start telling something, and it's not necessarily gossip, just some little trivia fact, that, did you know that the St. Johns River is the longest river in North America that runs from south to north? That is a fact. And some of you didn't know that, and I'm kind of proud of the fact that I knew what y'all didn't know. Now, we like to amaze people with things if we ever learn anything. And sometimes that's why we gossip. It's because I learned something they didn't know. And I want people to be impressed that I knew that. And there's also this. I want people to, I want to make myself look better. And sometimes I just can't get it. I can't make myself be any better. So what I try to do is just pull everybody down to my level. If I can, tell this and, get people to think less of them, then at least I've equalized things. That's pride. That's why I gossip. So, am I telling it out of love and concern for others? Is it true? Is there any benefit to it? Could it be my pride coming into it? And then there's this last one. Is it really anybody else's business? 1 Thessalonians 4 addresses something. This is another one of those, it has its gray areas. Because we can't be Christians and not be concerned about others. But look at verse 9. But concerning brotherly love, you have no need that I should write to you. For you yourselves are taught by God to love one another. And indeed you do so toward all the brethren who are in all Macedonia. But we urge you, brethren, that you increase more and more, that you also aspire to lead a quiet life, to mind your own business, and to work with your own hands as we commanded you, that you may walk properly toward those who are outside, that you may lack nothing. Work with your own hands. I've heard many lessons, read many articles on that. I've heard far fewer lessons, read far fewer articles on mind your own business. Look at 1 Peter, the 4th chapter. This is one of those that it still, after all these years of reading it, it still kind of strikes me. He is talking about suffering. And he said, but let none of you suffer as a murderer, a thief, an evildoer, or as a busybody in other people's matters. Murderer, thief, evildoer. Then he says busybody. I mean, does that not remind you a little bit of one of those kind of things? Which one doesn't belong? You know, and you've got these things. In our minds, does busybody really belong in there with murderer and thief? God put it there. A lot of gossip gets spread around because the gossiper is concerned about people's affairs that really have no business being concerned about. And then they share it with people that really have no right to that other person's business. Again, I know there are times that sin is involved, and we need to be, getting into that. We need to deal with it. But sometimes we're just being busybodies, and we need to stop that. Well, gossip is a challenge for a lot of reasons. People love to hear it. People love to tell it. There are some gray areas. That makes it sometimes it's a challenge to know. But I hope this will help us. We've got to guard our tongues. We're going to be judged by our words. As we conclude tonight, let me just say this. Be it gossip or any other sin, there is one who can forgive you, who can bring cleansing. And if you have not come to him, I hope you'll do so. We're glad to help you if you'll come as we stand and sing together. Thank you for watching this video. We're glad that you have found our channel. And in fact, while you're here, we would encourage you to subscribe to the Jones Road Church of Christ channel. We have several videos already up, and we believe you'll find these to be true to God's Word, helpful to you in your journey toward God. And if you have any questions, please reach out to us and let us know how we can help you.